The Australian housing market is completely broken. Prices are out of control, debt levels have risen exponentially, and the wealth gap between the haves and the have-nots just keeps widening and widening. Worst of all, some very hard-working Australians may never be able to afford to own their own home, and in my opinion, this is an absolute tragedy. I'm Biko Konstantinos, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Please give this video a like if you enjoy it and consider subscribing to my channel. My mission is to provide you with quality and up-to-date content to support your goals. Now let's talk about the Australian housing market. For this discussion, I'm going to go through this article from Alan Kohler called Waking Up from the Australian Dream. Alan Kohler states that the disaster of the extreme Australian house prices over the past 40 years has not just reshaped the economy, but has actually fundamentally changed society in Australia. In 1980, the average median price was around $70,000, and now 40 years later, it's in the mid-700,000s. Basically, they've risen about 10 times during that period, including a 25% rise just in the last 18 months. So this chart measures the median house price per capita income. So the per capita income measures the total income in an area divided by the population number. So as you can see, since around 1980, the ratio for several developed countries has trended slightly down. However, Australia has more than doubled, going from 100 to now around 240. So extreme house price rises combined with slow wages growth has put Australian housing in a very precarious position. Another very worrying fact about Australian housing is the debt level. Over the past 40 years, Australian household debt has increased from half to twice the average disposable income, and from 40% of GDP now to 120%. So because so much wealth and so much debt is tied up in housing, the Australian economy basically is housing. And for this reason, a housing collapse would actually devastate the entire economy. The Australian Bureau of Statistics reported that total household wealth has increased by 20% in the past 12 months to $14.6 billion. Now this is an increase of 942% since the ABS started measuring household net wealth in 1990. Now this increase in wealth sounds really nice, but when you look closer, it's almost entirely due to growth in the value of the places we live in. According to Alan Kohler, rising house prices doesn't create wealth, it redistributes it. He goes on to say that household wealth is destructive, and that's because of the inequality that it results in. With so much wealth concentrated in the home, it stays with those who already own a house and within families. So for someone with little or no family housing equity behind them, it's virtually impossible to break out of the cycle and build new wealth. Kohler says that the growth in land value has fundamentally changed society in two ways. First, young people are being impoverished by the cost of shelter or rents. And second, the way that wealth has created has fundamentally changed or shifted. Education and hard work no longer determine how wealthy you are. Now it comes down to where you live and what sort of house you inherit. It means Australia is no longer an egalitarian meritocracy because material success is a function of geography and class, not accomplishment. And this is an absolute disaster in my opinion. So a simple definition of these terms: meritocracy rewards according to achievement, and egalitarianism is the equality of individual people or of groups. So let's consider an example. A young person, through no fault of his own, grows up with parents who own no property. However, this young person is very driven, studies hard at school and university, and gets an above average paying job. Now, the way rents and the cost of living is going, this person might have to save for 10 or even maybe 15 years before they have a decent deposit to buy a very average house. They pay tax on all their earnings, so only have a small amount left to try to save. And when they do eventually buy a house, their mortgage might be so massively high that it could take them the next 50 years to repay it. They get no benefit from the 10 times price rises since 1980, as they will receive no housing inheritance. And so they've also received no benefit from the over-generous housing taxation policies. For example, a principal residence owner does not pay any tax on house price rises. Yet if someone's not able to afford a home, they do not get the benefit of a similar concession on anything else they might try to invest in, for example, shares, crypto, or any other investment. So while they're busy trying to save after-tax money, house owners could be making hundreds of thousands of dollars tax-free. And this is why the wealth gap has been widening and widening. And so how is this person supposed to feel when they're working extremely hard, yet they might see their peers working nowhere near as hard, but much better off financially because their family owns property that has had 40 years of unbelievable growth. And they've also had the benefit of unbelievable housing tax concessions. Now this is currently the biggest disaster I see from the housing affordability crisis in Australia. In my opinion, wealth should be able to be attained equally by everyone and not just property owners. So are young people going to rise up in protesters against the baby boomers who were able to buy property at only around 3 times the average income, while now it's actually above 10 times the average income? I've observed the price rises, and buying a house in today's market is completely different to what it was in the 1980s, 1990s, and even in the 2000s. People often say, yeah, but the interest rates were higher, but it's much easier to buy a house and to make repayments when your mortgage is low relative to your income. If the average income now is around about 80,000, then if we were at the same ratio in the 1980s, then the average price would only be about 250,000 or maybe 300,000. What a difference that would be compared to the $1 million average prices in many of the capital cities today. We've had so many inquiries into housing affordability in Australia, but no real policy change or action has been done as far as I can tell. Sure, we've had lots of first homer concessions and grants, but studies have shown that that actually puts upwards pressure on house prices. So in the end, it doesn't really help first home buyers at all. The Australian dream used to be to own your own home, but according to Kohler, the Australian dream now might be that a group of politicians might be capable of doing something useful about housing affordability. Now, the latest committee put together to look at housing affordability did not even want to look at the taxation of housing or land. In other words, they did not want to look at any changes to the over-generous housing taxation policies in Australia, which in my opinion has encouraged speculation in property and over-leverage, so getting into too much debt. However, that's been rewarded because property prices have gone up and up and up, which just encourages more and more speculation. And inevitably now, we have a housing affordability crisis. According to Kohler, the committee's report should have said that the level of house prices and debt in Australia is a blunder, perhaps the biggest policy mistake in 50 years. And I would tend to agree. Things are slowly starting to change and countries are getting more serious about housing affordability. New Zealand scrapped their negative gearing for new investments, and New Zealand and now recently Canada has banned sale of properties to foreigners. So countries are starting to take housing affordability serious and make some real policy changes. But will Australia follow? Personally, I really hope they do and they overhaul our housing taxation policies. So whether you own properties or don't, I think we can all agree that we want people to have equal opportunities to be able to get ahead and to create wealth in Australia. Just because someone was born and raised, say, in regional Australia, I don't think they should have a massive disadvantage to, say, someone who's born in Sydney, whose parents own property in Sydney, and so they start off with this ginormous wealth gap. But that's the state of Australian society, sadly. So what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think we've got ourselves into a situation where it's not really fair? That financial success is not just based on merit anymore, but really just based on whether you own property or your family owns property? And also, do you have any ideas that might be able to improve the situation? Now, since housing affects all of our lives, why don't you subscribe to my channel so together we can learn and keep up to date on what's happening. I'm Biko Konstantinos, and I'll catch you in my next video.